Three key elements to break away from addictions and unwanted behavior. The three elements that are key to self-help. These are the qualities and abilities that you need to develop and enhance within yourself. Of course, this is not impossible to do, and just like everything else, this cannot be facilitated if Allah does not facilitate it. No matter which self-help book you read, coaching you take, or workshops you go to, if you cannot bring these three ingredients, success will be far away. In this episode, we will be discussing these three elements as Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah responded to the one who asked him about the cure for one who is addicted to a behavior and knows that this is leading him to destruction, but he cannot seem to come out of it. Many times when we are dealing with people and trying to enhance their performance and their achievements and satisfaction in different areas of their life, we notice that there is typically an addiction, an unwanted behavior, a fear, some sort of an enslavement to some desire or unwanted behavior, or a love or an extreme love for a person or something that the person is not able to achieve. And that desire and that love or that addiction or that behavior is really causing the person to slow down and not make progress towards their goals. Now, this can be something emotional, something related to weight loss, something related to not making progress in their business or careers or their education, and so on and so forth. Or something related to a destructive sin that is really putting them far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the question arises, and this is kind of related to the book that we are also discussing, the book, The Disease and the Cure, in which a questioner asks Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah about the situation of someone who is into an addictive behavior or a destructive behavior. He understands that this is leading it to his destruction, but he cannot seem to come out of it. So the first thing that the Imam mentions is around the fact that, hey, is there even a cure for that? Is there even a solution for that? And again, he quotes something that we discussed in our earlier episodes, and that is the notion of that, look, any disease that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down has a cure. Right? And this is the hadith that we discussed earlier as well. مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ مِنْ دَاءٍ إِلَّا جَعَلَ لَهُ دَوَاءً. That Allah does not send down any disease, but He also sends down a cure for it. So that is from a mindset perspective that yes, it is possible. So regardless of your situation, regardless of your addiction, regardless of your unwanted behavior, it is possible for you to come out of it, for you to give it up, for you to break out of it. Then the Imam mentions two things. One is the prevention, and the other angle of it is to uproot it. So basically, one is to prevent that sort of unwanted behavior or addiction or characteristics to even form within you in the first place. And the second is, if it has formed, if it has taken place, if it has hooked you up, how do you get rid of it? Before we go into those two ways or two steps or two directions, something to understand is that, look, it is only easy and possible for someone who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates for. And the one who is left by Allah to depend on himself, his own intellect, his own activities, his own means and his own activities will not be successful, and that person will be the loser. So this is why you see the dua in the sunnah in which the Prophet ﷺ would ask Allah to not let him depend on himself, but to depend and to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to rectify our affairs and to reform our affairs. So this is what our dua should be. This is what our dependence should be. And with that dependence and that understanding and that faith, we take action to help us out. So if I go on a side tangent, this is something I keep saying about that. Look, the salah, the prayer is not a time for planning. It's a time for asking. So when we are in prayer, we need to understand that, hey, I'm not trying to depend on myself, but I'm in front of someone, in front of the one who owns everything, who controls everything. So let me ask him for his help, for his facilitation, for his assistance, rather than thinking about my to-do list or thinking about my planning or planning my next steps. So whenever a concern comes in prayer, we should understand and go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask him to help us out. Another way to do that would be to remind ourselves before the prayer that, look, I'm going to pray. I'm going to take time out to pray to the one who controls everything. And likewise, when we get busy and we're like, oh, I don't have time to pray, we need to remind ourselves that, look, the one that I'm praying to, the one I'm going in to meet in the prayer, which is a one-on-one meeting, is the one who owns and controls everything. Okay, so that was a side point. But it's very important to remember that, look, we need to depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and consistently and continuously ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So having said that, now we'll be taking a look at those two ways. One is the prevention, and then the second one is, once it happens, how do we respond? How do we uproot it? How do we take it out? So let's talk about the prevention. The first thing that he mentions is the protection of gaze, lowering the gaze. And this is part of the last 4 episodes that we talked about, these 4 entry points, right? The sight, the thoughts, and so on and so forth, right? And then we talked about minding our steps and watching out what steps we take and how one step builds up to 1,000 steps and how a person can deviate from one step to the next and so on and so forth. So let us talk about this point of lowering your gaze and protecting your sight. This is again from the perspective of prevention, right? And how the sight is as an entry point for a lot of addiction and for a lot of deviations. So a few episodes ago, we talked about the sight in detail. Now in this one, he's reminding us on the benefits and the fruits of controlling your sight and lowering your gaze and not looking at things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. And he brings out various benefits in his book, and we'll be only talking about a few of them for the perspective of keeping it in the scope of this podcast and not to make it too long. So now he talks about the first one is that, look, by doing that, you are carrying out Allah's command. You're obeying Allah. So whenever you stop looking at things that are unnecessary for you to look at, that are prohibited for you to look at, it will bring happiness to you because you're obeying your Lord. Second thing he talks about is that it prevents that poisonous arrow from shaitan. The third point he mentions is that because of that, you will have the blessing of having your heart attached to Allah. So when we let our eyesight go loose, we will make our heart away from Allah. Right? So the more we obey Allah, the more we capture and look at things that Allah is pleased with, the more opportunity and the more blessings we would have that our hearts will be connected and attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then fourthly, he mentioned that we will earn the light of heart. And he mentions the connection in Surah Al-Nur, in which the verse of the Nur comes in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions his Nur and then the light of the heart of a believer, and how the verse is preceded by the command to lower the gaze. So that's something interesting to take a look at. Go back to the translation of Surah Nur and look at the translation of Ayat of Nur. Fifth point he mentions is the true firasa, right? Which is can be translated as the ability to distinguish between the truth and falsehood. Is the ability, the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the believers, the insight, the understanding that they are able to see the truth from the falsehood. Their heart is directed, their heart is pure, and their heart becomes a compass and is able to detect the truth and the falsehood, right? Which options to take, who to trust, and so on and so forth, right? It's about clarity, it's about sharpness, it's about insight, right? And now, think about this. How does that happen? Is that, look, the reward of a good deed is something similar to it, right? So if someone gives a falsehood, if someone gives us what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not desire, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them insight. So you don't look at things that are prohibited, and Allah gives you the insight. Allah blesses you with that internal seeing, that ability to discern, to understand the truth from the falsehood. So the one who follows the sunnah in external, right, and is internally aware and cautious that Allah is watching him, and he lowers his gaze and refrains from the doubtful matters, Allah will open the gates of knowledge for him. Allah will open the gates of firasa for him, and Allah will increase him in his faith, and so on and so forth. So you closed your eyes to haram, and Allah opened up your insight for you. The next one that he mentions is the bravery of heart, the izzah, the glory, the power, the might, right? And this is something that has been mentioned in various places in the Quran, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. that the might, the honor belongs to Allah, His Messenger, and to the believers, right? So this is how Allah brings victory and might to the believers. So the more you obey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more izzah, the more honor, the more might, the more bravery will you be getting. And likewise in other places such as وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. In Surah Ali Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says not to lose hope and not to get tired and not to grieve, because Allah is promising that you will be the one who will be victorious, who will be overpowering, who will be victorious if you are believers. And from the point of belief and iman, we know that it includes your statement as well as your actions, the actions of the external actions as well as the internal actions, right? So if you have that iman, which is a statement and action, you will be the one who will be overpowering and who will have the izzah and so on and so forth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Fatir, Man kana yuridu al-izzah, whoever desires the izzah, the might, the glory, فَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ جَمِيعًا. And for Allah is all the might and power, right? إِلَيْهِ يَسْعَدُ الْكَلِيمُ الطَّيِّبُ. To Allah is, goes up or rises up the good word, and the وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحِ, and the good actions, the righteous actions, it elevates it, right? So think about it, right? Your obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected to your izzah, to your victory, to your glory, to your might, and so on and so forth. Now, again, we are talking this all in the context of lowering gaze and not looking at prohibited and haram things, but this is a very general concept. The more obedient, the more compliant you are to Allah's deen and Allah's order, the more might, the more power, the more izzah, the more success, and the more victory you will have. And likewise in the dua in which we say, the dua of qunut, that إِنَّهُ لَا يَذِلُّ مَنْ وَالَيْتَ وَلَا يَعِزُّ مَنْ عَادَيْتَ. That there's no one who can humiliate and overpower the one that Allah takes as an ally, right? And no one can basically give power and might and success to the one that Allah takes as an enemy. So these are some of the benefits of closing the entry point for shaitan to the heart, right? And that entry point is the sight. He takes different, deceptions and different, just take a quick look, just see what's going on, just have a look, right? And this is how things start. If you look at any person who has an issue in terms of addiction, in terms of, falling into unwanted behavior, they started trying something, right? They just said, okay, let me just try. Let me just go and check it out. Let me just, go and try it out. And that's how it starts, right? And then you get hooked onto it. So the first thing is to prevent, right? And it's not to make things constricting. It's just basically make your life easier. Why give yourself taste of something that will addict you? That will be very hard for you to come out of. And the reason it happened is that we go and we try something, and then we kind of get hooked on to this instant gratification, and then hard work and other good qualities are left alone. Now, the second angle, the second route is that, after prevention, let's say if somebody has already fallen into an unwanted behavior, then the Shaykh, the Imam Rahimahullah, he discusses a very important point. He says, look, you cannot give up the love of something unless you have something that you love more, right? So realizing and understanding and contemplating and asking for it, that you have a love for a beneficial thing, and your love for that is much higher than your love for the destructive behavior. Okay, so you may have an addiction. You may be like, for example, falling into a love of a person that is impermissible for you, or an addiction or a behavior that's, impermissible. Now, that is something that you naturally desire for instant gratification and so on and so forth, okay? Because it fulfills some sort of your emotional need. It fulfills some sort of your gratification need, okay? Now, if you have a love for something else, okay, that is positive, that is constructive, right? And then you're comparing that, look, yes, I desire this thing, but I also desire that other thing, right? And if I go after my lowly desires, if I go after my desires of unwanted behavior, I'm going to miss out on my main love, my primary love. Then that will motivate you to not go after your lowly desires. Or on the opposite, the fear of losing something greater, okay? So you may think, okay, look, I want to go for this unwanted behavior for whatever reason, for instant gratification or what have you, okay? But I fear that if I don't work on something else that is a constructive thing, then I may lose something even greater. And that loss is going to be much more painful than for me to give up this unwanted behavior. Okay? So imagine this, all right? Let's take some examples. So let's say, if somebody is, addicted to a very common issue is pornography, right? And they're addicted to taking a look at and, going back to, indecent movies and films or pictures on the internet, okay? Now, this is something that gives them this instant gratification and, this instant rush of blood and all that sort of stuff that happens, right? And they get this instant gratification and that's this emotional experience and so on and so forth, right? But then what happens is that after that, usually they're so tired, they go on this guilt trip and they go on all these routes, and then they're not able to function properly. They're not able to pursue their goal. Okay, now we're not even talking about the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the extreme pure love, and we'll talk about it in the next few episodes, even from a dunya perspective, right? Now that person, because I know, for example, when I talk to some university students and I know they have been like failing and really, really doing poorly in their exams and their studies and so on and so forth, right? And that person contemplates that, look, I have this possibility of earning this degree and, graduating and then doing all this great work that I want to do for my family, for myself, and so on and so forth. But this behavior is kind of preventing me from even graduating. I may drop out of the university and I may still have all that student loan. Right? If the person contemplates on that, it's look, I have two options. Either I quit this behavior. If I don't quit this behavior and I relate that to my failure in university, right? That becomes a bigger fear of not quitting university, right? Or the love for all the possibilities of completely, succeeding in university, getting a good job, good career, and so on and so forth, and actually having positive, real, meaningful, and good, solid emotional connection with real people, as opposed to going on and watching things on my digital screen, right? So that could be an example of it. Right? Obviously, a very pure example would be for someone to realize who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and to realize the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the possibilities that exist with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as the izzah, the glory, the might, the victory, the Jannah, the paradise, and all these things, right? That would be the ultimate thing. But even as a middle stage, if the person realizes what is at on stake because of their unwanted behavior, they may have that motivation to realize and quit the unwanted behavior. So first thing is to theoretically really realize and internalize is that there's something bigger that they're missing out on. So that's the first element, is the realization of what are they missing out because of their unwanted behavior. Okay, and what is possible for them to achieve if they were to leave that unwanted behavior. Now, if I were to take a pause here, I would like you to go back and think about how we started this podcast series. The first 3 episodes, right? The first episode, we have you worked out a plan on what is possible for you to achieve in this life. We talked about the stronger identity, like what are you able to achieve if you take on that stronger identity, right? And we helped you to write down your things and your plans and your dreams so that you can have a greater goal, so that you can realize that because of some of your unwanted behavior and your negative activities and your negative energy and your laziness, or you're not putting in your full 100%, or your fears or whatever is around you that's preventing you, what is at stake, what you are able to achieve, what are your true dreams, what are you able to do, right? So if you have not done that, I recommend you go back to episode number 1 of this podcast. Or if you have done it, it would still be a good idea to review it, to review your stronger identity and see if you are following that. How much are you compliant with that stronger identity that you wrote down? How much progress have you made towards your goals? Okay, and what needs to change in that definition? Maybe over time, over the last 2 quarters, you've realized that there are some behaviors that needs to change. Maybe you need to change a bit on your identity. Maybe you need to change a bit on your behavior or on your mindset. Or maybe you need to change a bit on your dreams. Maybe you now have realized that much higher and goals are possible, much higher things are possible, and you can have extra ambition. So from the 3 ingredients, the first one now is to realize that what is there for you to love more, right? And the ability to understand what is more powerful, what is more constructive, and what is more destructive. So then you'll be able to see what you are losing because of your unwanted behavior. Now, once you have that realization, you still need 2 more ingredients for you to be successful. The first one is the willpower. Okay, now this is again going back to the first episode. You have to have that willpower to behave like that stronger identity, the stronger you, right? And to behave like that would require willpower, and not to go back on your unwanted behavior. And we talked in detail about it in the first 2-3 episodes about how you would behave in terms of when you go to bed, how you go to bed, what do you think about, what kind of thoughts that you download, what kind of thoughts that you prevent. So a lot of that has been talked about in different episodes, okay? Now, the second thing that is super important. And that is one of the key things that I really miss out on people that I'm working with, and that is the importance of patience, right? Things will not happen overnight. You have to be patient. You have to be consistent. We have been talking about it again and again. You have to consistently take one step at a time. You have to understand that one step is what is needed for 1,000 steps journey, and so on and so forth, right? You have to be patient. You have to be patient when making dua. You have to be consistent when making dua, right? And these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Sajda when He says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً. We made them leaders. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. They were guiding people by our command. Why? What the 2 qualities that they had? لَمَّا صَبَرُوا. When they were patient. وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ. And they were firmly believing in our ayahs, in our verses, in our proofs, evidences, promises, lessons, so on and so forth. Okay? And this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. O you who have believed. إِسْتَعِينُوا. Seek help بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. With patience and with prayers. Right? So look, we have given you this model, this is something that our scholars, our ulama, the people of the deen have written down books and books and have talked about it, right? Now the point is for us to work hard to bring in these characteristics of patience, hard work, willpower, and you will see the change. You will see the change. So as a quick summary, look, it is possible. Number 1, depend on Allah, ask Allah. Secondly, prevent it from happening, prevent it from happening or prevent it from worsening. Right? So for example, somebody has this addiction, any sort of addiction, and they keep going it and they keep giving themselves more and more of it, and things become more and more worse, right? They become worse, right? And so this is something for us to realize. And then second thing is, if it has happened, to realize that what else can we be achieving? What else are we losing? What's more important for us? And then to have that willpower and the patience to go and get it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate it for us. Allahumma aslih lana sha'anana kulla wa la takilna ila anfusina tarfat ayn. Oh Allah, rectify and reform our affairs and do not make us depend on ourselves for the blink of an eye.